The Black Ship Side Story, Barony of Screaming Forests, Day 2. Wyatt had been very glad that he was only on the radio to the general when he had asked after his daughter. It hid his reaction, but his reply came easily enough. "Elizabeth is fine, General. I only called to see if maybe you could aid me with something else. I'm in need of ground-based transportation, a vehicle that can transport 6 to 12 people across dirt roads between the farms, just until I can have new vehicles imported." General Swallowtail had taken time to consider his reply. "I can find something suitable for you, Baron. I'll even throw in some spare fuel for you, but I want something in return. Not something tangible, but something more personal. I'd like you to take care of my wife and daughter if anything happens to me." Wyatt was surprised at that. His own reply had been spontaneous. "General, I fly fighters in battles. The chances of me surviving the next few years are not guaranteed, but I'll do what I can to ensure their safety." "I can't offer more than that." The general's own reply came quickly. "A fair reply, Baron. Times are troubled, and I'd like to cover all venues of possibilities. I can rest easier with such a promise. I'll find you a reasonable vehicle by tomorrow and send it over to you." Wyatt had replied, "No need to send it, General. So long as it's smaller than a tank, I can lift it under a shuttle. Let me know when it's ready and just park it out in the open, away from homes, and I can come and pick it up." "We are in agreement. Tornell out." That had been that. After the short exchange, Wyatt changed back into his uniform before exiting the shuttle on the Nornavio. Printing out maps turned out to be surprisingly easy. The information was already stored in his datapad, with each building already identified. All he had to do was pick 3 starting points. He chose 3 road junctions, each one roughly in the middle of 1/3 of the town. Then, using routing software, he created 16 sets of walking paths from each location, made each a separate map, and printed them out. As both a lieutenant commodore and a baron, no one questioned his authority to do so. However, he did make a note of what he had done. He wasn't sure if he would be charged for using the ship's facilities for doing this, but Clara had told him that keeping records was important. Wyatt's last task that night had been to let the Eternal Garden know that he would be there at 0700 to pick up the remaining 2 architectural technicians and 48 handymen or maintenance workers for a simple task that would involve a lot of walking, and to be prepared, he also arranged for additional food supplies to be loaded onto the shuttle. At 0600, he had got up, showered, and gone to the mess for a large breakfast. It promised to be another long day, and there was no point in his going hungry. By 0700, he was on the Eternal Garden, loading the 50 former prisoners, and from there, it did not take him long to return to Newtown, putting the shuttle down in the same exact location and once again changing into his commoner clothing. As they walked into the square, he immediately noticed the smell of fresh-baked bread and saw that everyone was sitting outside at the tables, preparing various food items. Ino and Declan were standing waiting for him when he arrived. The men and women from the Eternal Garden had carried down numerous boxes of additional food and supplies. Ino shouted out, "Put the supplies down and grab yourself something to take with you for your lunch. Help yourself to anything on the tables." Ino then turned to Wyatt, saying, "After you left last night, Declan and I went with the doc to check on the supplies in the bakery and the fresh produce shop. Turned out that almost everything that we'd left was perfectly edible. Though the doc threw out a couple of things he wasn't quite sure of, the cooks got fresh dough prepared last night and then got up really early this morning to bake fresh bread. You should try some, it's delicious." Declan nodded. "Ino's right, it's excellent," he said, continuing. "So between the supplies we brought with us and the food in the shop, we have plenty of food. There was the bread, cheese, cold meats, fruits, and a lot of ration bars. There were even bags in the bakery we could use to wrap everything up, so we just had everyone choose stuff they liked." Wyatt asked, "What about the cooks?" Ino replied, "After breakfast, we sent them off for a few hours extra sleep. Some of the people we won't need this morning actually offered to help clear up." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Well, that was nice," he said. "We should probably add more cooks, perhaps looking for a couple of bakers and others who can help with cleaning up." He added a note to his datapad so he would remember to do just that before continuing. "What about our existing builders and carpenters?" Declan answered, "They left just before you got here." Wyatt waited until the new arrivals had gathered their lunches before announcing, "I have here maps for all of you. If the 3 architectural technicians can come forward, please." Wyatt waited until the two men and the lady from the previous day came forward before giving each a map pack and a box of colored pens before continuing. These three will each take 16 of you to your starting points. Each of you have a map for just your route with where I'd like you to be at certain times. This is so our three technicians can collect the data at regular times during the day. Your task is so simple that even a blue blood could do it. A few laughs came from the workers at this comment. All I want you to do is take these colored pens and walk past each building in the street, if the building is clearly unusable. Maybe it has a tree growing out of its roof, or all the windows are broken, or perhaps it's a burnt-out shell. Then I want you to put a black cross inside the box that represents that building. If it's a house, I want you to put a green cross. If it's a shop of any sort, a blue cross. And if it's some sort of industry, I want you to put a red cross. Finally, if you are not sure what it is, then placed in a purple cross. Is that clear? Does anyone have any questions? A single hand raised near the rear of the group. Wyatt pointed to them. Yes, sir. What's your question? The young man with his hand in the air asked. So when we get to the points on the map, we stop and wait for the technician, even if we have a while to wait? Is there anything else we can do? Wyatt thought for a moment before replying, It's vital you are at these points at these times, so I don't want you wandering off, but all of you listed your jobs as handyman or general maintenance worker. So as you walk around the town, I want you to think about what you could do to help. Most of the town has had little to no repairs or maintenance for 30 years. You all have skills. This evening, I'm going to ask you to get together and discuss amongst yourselves, then form groups with similar skills. Afterwards, you will share with us what you think you can repair or improve, and what tools and materials you will need to do that job. Is there anything else? This time, no hands were raised, and so Wyatt sent them off in their groups before he turned again to Ino and Declan. Yes, I know I just insulted every noble, including myself, with the blue blood comment, but we need these people happy and content. We need to be seen to be doing our share of the work, perhaps even more than our share, rather than just sitting back and letting them do everything for us. Do you understand? You? Declan replied, As my lord commands, making Wyatt wince, but he then went on to say, I cannot fault your reasoning, my lord. I shall do whatever is asked, as will my staff, getting a thank you, Declan, from Wyatt in return. Ino, taking his cue from Declan, replied formally, My lord Baron, as you know, I am an exiled bastard son of a minor lord. You have been kind enough to offer me a position here with a high degree of responsibility as an administrator. If that means being polite to those on whose survival and well-being my own position depends on, then I have no problems, my lord. However, I am not quite sure as to exactly what my role will be. Wyatt stood thinking for a moment before answering. I know. I have no idea what I'm doing here, except that I'm trying to do the right thing, but I need someone trustworthy to look after my interests whilst I am absent, which will be much of the time. If the town and the estate do well, I swear you will do well out of it. Her Highness, however, asked me to remind you that you will be one of a tiny number of nobles on Hago. Your actions could have consequences. That means letting myself or the inhabitants of my estate down will simply result in your disappearance. You have a chance here to do well for yourself. If you choose to do so, you can take until it's time for the Nornavio to leave to make your decision if you like. Ino's eyes went wide when Wyatt informed him of Clara's words, and he paused before saying, I think, my lord, that if you will allow me, that I should take some more time to consider your words before I make such an important decision. Wyatt smiled before saying, Good choice. Now I am off to collect more people. There are 37 more people who claim to be builders. I will add 2 more cooks and 2 more people who can clean and tidy. And unless you can think of anyone else, I will fill up the remaining seats with carpenters, since we have so many wooden buildings. Declan and Ino looked at each other, shrugged, then replied, That seems reasonable, my lord. It took Wyatt almost 2 hours to take the shuttle up to the Eternal Garden, assemble what he needed, and return to Newtown. When he got back, he sent the cooks and cleaners into the inn to help out, before having the remainder take what they wanted for lunch, this time remembering to grab some food for himself before the tables emptied. Wyatt gave the builders and carpenters simple instructions. I want you to go to the architectural technicians. They should be at the places I've marked on your maps. When you get there, they will show you which houses we want you to look at. If you cannot open a door or a window to get inside, move on to the next house and mark on the map. The technicians will give you that it's unchecked. There are plenty of properties that are unlocked, so you don't need to break in. If there is anything obviously wrong with the house that makes it uninhabitable, mark it on the map and move on. If the house is okay to live in but needs minor repairs such as a broken window or small spots of rot, make a note of the details, then move to the next house. The object is to find as many habitable houses as possible, as quickly as possible. Once we get tools and materials, then we can look at having you do building repairs. I want one builder to come with me, please. The rest of you will split into 3 groups, 1 per architectural technician, 12 builders and 3 carpenters per group. And with that he sent them on their way. Wyatt turned back to Ano and Declan, saying, "Whilst I'm gone, why don't the 2 of you see what the shops and homes around the square contain? Could we put people in any of them tonight, for example? We have 50 more people, and we will need places for them to sleep. Feel free to have anyone not helping the cooks give you a hand." Then, with the builder following, Wyatt walked out of the square. He didn't go far, just to the first junction where the 2 half-timbered stone buildings stood. Testing each of the front doors, he found both were unlocked, so he turned to the builder and said, "I'd like you to look over both these buildings, see if either one is fit to be lived in right now, and what work needs to be done on them, if any. Looking at them, I can see peeling paint, so that obviously needs sorting out. But I want to know if there are any leaks or rot or anything like that, which requires more serious work. When you are done, go and find Ino in the square and give him your report. Then, see what else he wants you to do, though I'd also appreciate if you would have a look at the station building and determine if anything can be salvaged when it gets demolished. Is that clear?" Wyatt winced again as the builder replied, "Yes, my lord." Shaking his head, Wyatt left him to do the work and started walking down the street. As he walked in the general direction of the harbor, he took the time to look around. Most of the buildings he passed were clearly homes, simple clapboard-covered designs in 2 basic styles, with a left- and right-handed version. Typically, they were set about 6 meters back from the street itself, with an 8-meter gap between adjacent houses. A 2-meter-high wooden fence joined each house to the next, with a side gate for each home. At the front, a waist-high fence contained the front garden for each house, with a path leading from the street-side gate to the front door and then to the side gate. Some of the front gardens were simply an area of grass with the path laid out in gravel or rectangular stone. But a large number of the gardens had low hedges, and were full of what he guessed would be flowering plants in a week or more time if the number of buds he could see were any sort of guide. Occasionally, Wyatt would come to a crossroads, and here the houses were often a bit larger, and of the same half-timbered and stone construction he had seen elsewhere. Often they were shops, or sometimes offices, or other business premises, although as he looked through windows he found most of these were empty and locked up. But occasionally he would come across a shop that must have been open when the Drazen arrived. Here the doors were often unlocked as if the people had simply popped out. One shop caused him to stop and make a note on his map before calling the Nornavio with a request. It said Michael's the locksmith's above the door with, in smaller letters, beneath, "Keys cut, shoes and bags repaired." Inside were all sorts of tools and uncut keys of various sizes hanging on pegs. Wyatt felt like an idiot. Why had it not occurred to him before? It was such a simple solution. Just get the locksmiths to make new keys. Now they had somewhere with lots of blank keys and the equipment to cut new ones. He just hoped they could make new keys for all the existing locks. That would save him tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of credits for new locks and a lot of time. Continuing onwards in the direction of the harbor, he found himself crossing over a set of rail lines going east to west. He wondered where they went to, as he'd not noticed them on the map, but not wanting to be distracted, he carried on. The road now started to head down to the sea, and ahead of him he could see the waves beyond the harbor, so he quickened his pace. He was now in a river valley. To his left, he could hear the sound of the river as it dropped over rocks towards the sea, while on his right, the houses had changed to a different style than the ones he had seen previously. These were painted white and came in a variety of sizes, but all appeared to have been constructed of rough stone. Towards the bottom of the street he started to see people. They all appeared to be busy examining the various houses, so rather than interrupt them, he carried on to the harbor itself. Following the rail tracks to the ruined timber building, he could clearly see that the structure was well and truly flattened. It appeared that the local timber, while resistant to rot from fresh water, was more vulnerable to salt water. The large, originally shed-like structure had apparently been built on the top of the stone pier that formed the right-hand side of the harbor. At the foot of every upright post, there were clear signs of rot. At some point, judging from the damage, strong winds and probably waves had broken over the top of the wall behind the shed and shoved it with significant force, causing the rotten uprights to shear off. And this in turn had caused the whole structure to fall. Satisfied with his own explanation, he continued to have a look around. Finding a set of stone steps just beyond the ruined shed, Wyatt climbed up onto the top of the pier wall, where he found the top was almost 2 meters wide and easy to walk along. In front of him, he could see the small lighthouse that marked the end of the wall. It stood roughly 5 meters higher than the top of the wall, with a large glass front pointing out to sea. Turning around, Wyatt walked down the length of the wall, finally reaching another stone staircase at the far end, where the wall met another building. This was the one that once sold fish and chips. Walking around it, Wyatt discovered that at the rear there were glazed metal entrance doors, locked tight, and that the windows at the rear were also metal-framed, mostly covered by shutters. Moving to the end, not linked to the pier, he discovered it was formed in a semicircle, with its windows also protected by multiple wooden shutters. These windows and occasional doorways continued on the beach side, fully 3/4 of the length of the building. Between the top of the beach and the wall of the building, a 6-meter-wide paved area was partially protected by a 1-meter-high wall on the beach side. Steps ran up and over the wall in several places, forming a simple barrier to the sea, wind and sand striking the building itself. Wyatt sat on the top of this low wall looking out to sea, and ate one of the rolls with the local cheese he had grabbed earlier. Ino and Declan had been right. The bread did taste good, and the cheese had a rich, slightly nutty flavor, which went well with the bread. Both were far superior to the ration bars. He finished his sandwich and washed it down with fresh water from his water bottle, then got up and continued his walk. He crossed over the bridge, looking up towards the town. Wyatt realized that stone walls on each side had constrained this entire stretch of river with a series of low weirs helping control the flow as it dropped down to the harbor. As he got to the other side of the river, he spotted the young builder from the previous morning and called out, "Good morning, Igson! How are the surveys going?" Igson looked up and, realizing who had asked, quickly walked over to Wyatt. "Good morning, sir. Of the 24 houses on this side of the river, 19 have either the front or the back doors unlocked, and one had a broken window pane which allowed us to open the window and get access. So far, they all look acceptable except for superficial repairs. The broken window pane needs to be replaced. There is a gutter with grass growing out of it that obviously needs to be cleaned. Additionally, 2 slates on the roof need to be replaced. Still, the waterproof membrane beneath has kept the water out of the homes. Other than that, there is a small amount of rot that requires replacement, mainly at the bottom of the doors and a couple of window frames. Though once I find a ladder, I'd like to climb up and examine the soffits and barge boards near the gutters." Inside, we have looked at 11 houses, and so far there has been no trace of damp inside. They can, as you will see, do with freshening up with new paint inside and out, but again, all 11 we have checked could be occupied tomorrow. As for the broken pane of glass, if I can find a larger broken window, a glass cutter plus a couple of tools, and some putty, I can fix it in no more than 15 minutes. If I can't then, for the time being, I can find something to cover the opening. Wyatt looked at Igson before saying, "Okay, that's the good news. What aren't you saying?" Igson replied, "The appliances, sir, are mostly dead. Those that are not dead sound terrible. So far, we've found 1 freezer that's ice cold inside, 2 refrigerators that are still working, and 3 cookers. The freezer and 1 fridge are certainly dying. You can hear the bearings grinding. Honestly, sir, I think you will need to buy new ones for everybody." Damn, thought Wyatt. I suppose I should have expected that, though. New white goods would not have been a high priority for the previous leaders. He sighed deeply before saying, "Thank you for being honest, Igson. I should have thought of that myself. By the way, have you seen Elizabeth this morning?" At that, Igson, glad not to have to deliver any more bad news, replied, "Yes, sir. She's exploring the gardens behind these houses. If you go to the side, you will see a gate. Just keep going through to the next garden and then the next, until you find her. Last I saw of her, she was in the 6th garden." Wyatt nodded in thanks and went off to find Elizabeth, hoping that maybe she could give him some good news. He eventually located her in the 8th garden, where she was busy taking notes in a small, apparently handmade book. Wyatt greeted her with a cheerful tone. "Good morning, Elizabeth. I don't suppose you have anything interesting to report, perhaps some good news?" Elizabeth looked up, startled by Wyatt's voice. "Good morning, Wyatt. Good news? Well, maybe a little. The weather here must be slightly warmer than 1,200 kilometers to the east. Perhaps the sea has an effect, but spring here seems to maybe be a week earlier. Beyond that, I can tell you that many of these gardens feature edible plants, including both fruits and vegetables. Also, I noticed in the main part of town yesterday that many of the streets have fruit trees already in flower. Given their size, I would say that there will be a good-sized fruit crop this year in the area. Also, I've not found any of the dangerous plants, at least not so far." Wyatt laughed. "Well, that does all sound like good news, by the way. Is that a handmade book you're taking notes in?" Elizabeth glanced down at the object in her hand. "Yes, getting data pads or anything usable here has been difficult all my life. As the old ones broke down, we had no choice, so I found packaging material and things I could write on and made my own notebooks, and I index everything. One day I hope to be able to create a digital book with all the native plants and animals here on my world, but for now I collect as much information as I can on the plants and animals as and when I see them." Wyatt looked at the notepad in her hand, her neat handwriting providing a detailed description of the plant, including where she found it, the date, and even the weather, all of which was accompanied by an obvious line drawing underneath. Wyatt could draw and paint, but as he looked at the tiny, detailed drawings in Elizabeth's notebook, he could see she was a far better artist than he was. Quietly, he asked, "Would you mind if I took a few pictures of your work? I'd like to show them to someone." Elizabeth shrugged. "Of course, you are a lord. You can do as you want. Will you also be taking any attractive commoner girl that takes your fancy as well?" Wyatt was stunned. "Who the fuck starts a conversation like that? I just asked if I could take a couple of pictures of your notebook to show to a friend, because I think you are good and maybe they can help. You asked if I plan to take advantage of a woman?" Elizabeth replied, "The records always depicted nobles as ungrateful beasts, lustful creatures notorious for breeding, or heartless slavers lording themselves over commoners at every waking moment." Wyatt looked at her face and said, "Look, not all blue bloods are that bad. Sure, they abuse their power and are self-righteous, self-centered, egotistical, envious, greedy, petulant, glory-seeking, honor-thirsting idiots for the most part, but there are good ones. I've come to realize that for myself lately, not including me, of course. No matter what, I'll never consider myself a noble." Elizabeth looked at Wyatt, then replied, "My father thinks the same as you do, Wyatt. He did tell me that the historians only saved the bad things blue bloods did, so I guess you're right. Though, are you going to lay with a girl or a guy? I bet many are expecting you to do that. Lots of revolution officers did so all the time." Wyatt shook his head this time and simply said no. Elizabeth asked, "What, never?" laughing. Wyatt sighed, then continued, "I had always planned to do my time in the Navy, get my pension, and then retire with the benefits that would give me, only then getting married. I've never pursued sex actively." Elizabeth looked shocked. "So what now, then?" she asked. Wyatt, with a grin, answered, "Now? Time for work. And will you allow me to take those pictures?" Elizabeth simply shrugged, saying, "Sure, why not?" Having taken a handful of pictures showing the illustrations in her notebook, Wyatt left Elizabeth and moved on to the boat shed. There was no one outside, but on trying the door, he found it open, so went in. Inside, he found a lot of bits of machinery, some covered in rust, other bits mainly on shelves, clearly in as new conditions. At the other end of the shed, Wyatt could see an older man apparently sorting through items lying on the floor. Wyatt called out a, "Hello!" and waved, and the man quickly walked over, moving around the various items on the floor and crossing a bridge that spanned the entrance to the enclosed dock. "Good day, my lord," said the man as he approached Wyatt. He looked to be about 40 and appeared tough, yet skinny, with a wiry build. Wyatt held out his hand. "Please, call me Wyatt," he said, his voice almost pleading. Hesitatingly, the man shook Wyatt's hand. "The name's Mackenzie Fowld. I'm very pleased to meet you, Wyatt." That greeting instantly brought a smile to Wyatt's face, which was contagious, with Mackenzie returning the smile. "So, Mackenzie, what's the situation here? It looks as if you have a fair bit of scrap just lying around." asked Wyatt, gesturing to various bits of rusted and bent large chunks of machinery littering the floor. Ah, but you should have seen it this morning. I've moved everything useless out the shed and into a scrap pile. The scrap that's left is too heavy to move out on my own, but the overhead crane will let me move it all, in time, to the end of the building over there, said Mackenzie, gesturing towards one end of the building where a large roller shutter door was currently shut. But I need a forklift, or maybe a tractor with a bucket on the front to get it out the building and put somewhere. A couple of scrap metal bins would be good, I guess. Wyatt made notes on his datapad while Mackenzie talked, then asked, "And what about tools or machinery? What sort of condition are they in?" Mackenzie looked around and said, "To be honest, I have all the tools and machinery I could wish for. Whoever set up this place knew what they were doing, and we have it all. Also, they kept them in good condition. No rust on anything I've seen so far, except a little on a couple of hammers, and that's just surface. Even the machine tools have been well maintained. Being this close to seawater can be a problem with corrosion, but it looks to me like they purchased better quality tools, and then kept them clean and rust-free. Everything I've tried so far works just fine. Heck, if I had a couple of helpers, I'd have everything I need to get that big fishing boat back in the water in a matter of, say, 2 days, the other one. However, I need a good diesel mechanic to look at the engine. It might need spare parts, and I'm not sure if I have what we need here." Wyatt sat on the edge of a workbench and added some more notes as he listened, before saying, "There are 4 more people who claim to have boat-building experience up on that damn ship, and I am sure at least one of the mechanics will have diesel engine experience, which just leaves me needing to find a supply of diesel, and we could send the boats out to catch fish." Mackenzie replied, "I'm not sure where they make the fuel, but I can tell by the smell it's biodiesel, so they probably make it from a crop. But I can tell you there's a floating pontoon in the harbor just outside this shed that's a refueling station. I had a look earlier, and it's got about 11,000 liters of fuel in it still, according to the gauges, though its full capacity would be a bit more than double that. Depending on the boat and the size of engine installed, you are looking at a fuel consumption of between 10 and 40 liters per hour, a bit more if those hulls have much marine growth on them. So if we said 50 per hour, you have about 220 hours sailing time. Worst case, the smaller vessels likely will only work in inshore waters no more than, say, 11 kilometers off the shore. They will likely only go out for a short time, perhaps 4 or 5 hours. The larger vessels can go out further and for longer, but how far they will go, and for how long will depend on how quickly they fill their holds with fish. There is a fuel pipe that feeds the barge. It seems to head off to the west. Beyond that, I can't help." Wyatt stood up again, and wishing Mackenzie a good day, he set off to see more of the town. Now that Mackenzie had told him where to look, he could easily see the fuel pontoon and the supply pipe that fed it. It passed across the river on brackets off the bridge. But then he could not see where it could go. Hopefully someone would find the supply eventually. He had planned to seek out the architectural technicians, but 2 messages had come into his datapad. One to say that there were 2 locksmiths in the group of people still on the Eternal Garden, and one to say that General Swallowtail had what he was looking for and for Wyatt to call him, so Wyatt jogged back up the hill, through the streets, and out to the shuttle. Using the shuttle radio, Wyatt called General Swallowtail. "Good afternoon, General. Sorry for the delay. I was down at the harbor when I got your message and had to jog back up the hill." If the general was surprised that Wyatt was out surveying the town himself, he did not show it. Instead, he replied, "Not a problem, Baron. I have a vehicle for you, but it weighs about 25 tons. Wyatt swiftly did the calculations. It was well within the lift capacity for the shuttle, which would allow him to pick up the locksmiths and perhaps to ask Clara a question he had been thinking about for over an hour. But he also wanted to ask the general some questions. Reaching a decision, he replied, "General, I need to go back to the ship and collect lifting equipment and a few other things, but I would really like to talk face-to-face. Would that be possible? Are you near the vehicle?" After a moment, the general came back on the radio. "I'm not near it right now, Baron, but I could be in, say, 3.5 hours. Wyatt's reply was a simple, "Thank you, General. I will see you then." Wyatt started to prepare the shuttle for takeoff, then swore and stopped what he was doing and sprinted back to the square, yelling out as loud as he could. Aino when he got there. A window opened above one of the shop fronts and Aino leaned out. "Yes, sir," he shouted out. Wyatt beckoned him over, and 2 minutes later, breathing heavily, Ino was by his side. Wyatt told him. I completely forgot. We need accommodation for the 100 extra people I bought down today. Wyatt took out a printed map from his pocket indicating locations on it. This shows where the architectural technicians are supposed to be. Go find them and see if they have found any suitable locations. I'd prefer to use another inn or a barracks or similar, so we can keep people grouped together. Try to find places for up to 220 people for tonight at least. We will keep feeding everyone here for the time being. Ino listened to Wyatt's instructions and acknowledged them with a simple, "Okay, Wyatt," before asking, "Can I ask where you are going?" Wyatt paused. "Didn't I say?" "No, I didn't, did I?" "Damn! I'm going to go and pick up a pair of locksmiths. I am hoping they can make us keys for the locked buildings, because I noticed we have a locksmith shop in the town, which seems to be full of blank keys, and what I hope are all the tools a smith needs to get into a locked door. Whilst I'm there, I will pick up the last remaining carpenters and odd job men. On my way back, I'm going to go and see General Swallowtail, I have persuaded him, to lend us a vehicle which should make it easier to go visit the farms and maybe go into the forest." Ino nodded. "Oh, I guess that would make things easier. When will you be back?" Looking up at the clock, which was saying just after 1, Wyatt replied, "I should be back by 5, I think, maybe a little after." Ino nodded and said, "Okay, we will be ready. I'll see you later, Wyatt," before picking up the map and walking out of the square. As Wyatt walked back to the shuttle, he thought about Ino. The young man was certainly efficient, but there was something detached about him as well. Perhaps, thought Wyatt, I went too far with my warning. Resolving to speak with Ino later, he climbed back in the shuttle's cockpit and changed back into his uniform before taking off. On his way up, he contacted Navio, recognizing Galt's cheerful voice as he came over the headphones. "Good afternoon, Lieutenant Commodore. How may I help you?" Wyatt, smiling, replied, "Good afternoon, Lieutenant. Request permission to dock, and please pass on a request for an appointment with Her Highness if she has the time for me." Galt paused for only a moment, and then his voice came back over the radio. "Permission granted, and your appointment is likewise granted at your earliest convenience." 20 minutes later, Wyatt was back on board the Navio. He quickly went to his cabin, briefly showered, and put on a clean uniform. Noticing that yesterday's uniform had already been cleaned and pressed, it was hanging in his locker. Shaking his head, he proceeded to Clara's quarters, where the Royal Marines on duty stood to attention as the door opened to let him in. Clara and Cynthia waited inside as the door closed. A jug of grape juice and 3 glasses were set on the table. Clara waved him to his usual seat, a look of concern on her face. "Whatever is the matter, Wyatt?" she asked. Wyatt sat down and just blurted out, "Clara, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know where to order things from or how to ship them or who to speak to or anything. Can't I go back to being just your night banneret? Please," he begged. Cynthia sniggered softly, earning a look from Clara before she replied to her friend, "No, Wyatt. You are stuck with your new title, I'm afraid, but you are still my night banneret and always will be. However, maybe I can help my friend," she offered with a genuine smile. "What seems to be the problem?" Wyatt took out his datapad to remind him of the things he needed to ask. "Firstly, I want to order datapads for all the inhabitants of Newtown. Right now they have nothing. Many of them will have some credits to their name. At least with a datapad they will be able to access that information, and I won't have to get things printed out for them. Oh, and I'm sure I owe someone for all the printing I've had to do. But I have no idea where to order 1,600 datapads from. And there goes 3.2 million credits because I want to get good ones that will be useful." Clara looked at Wyatt. "Is that all?" she asked. Wyatt continued, "Oh no, that's just one thing. I think I need 1,500 new sets of what the builder called white goods, cookers, refrigerators, freezers, and so forth. According to him, the kitchens in the houses are generally fine, but the white goods are not. So that's another fortune. Those are just today's problems, but I don't know where to start." Looking down at the tablet, Wyatt saw another note. "Also, how do I get a book published?" Clara looked startled at that. "A book? Are you sure, Wyatt? I didn't know you could write." Wyatt got flustered at that. "Oh, no, not for me, but, He opened the pictures on the datapad that he had taken earlier. "The advisor General Swallowtail sent over. She has all these notes on the plants and animals," said Wyatt, passing over the datapad, so Clara could see the pages he had photographed. I think this would be really useful for everyone to have on their data pads, because none of us know anything about the native species. Clara took her time examining the pages and reading each description. After a few minutes, she looked up and said, "These are really good, especially the pictures. She's clearly talented. Who is this woman?" Wyatt laughed. "I thought so too. I can sketch and paint, but nothing is as good as these pictures. Would you believe she's the 19-year-old daughter of General Swallowtail?" "Really?" asked Clara, casually passing the datapad across to Cynthia. Wyatt nodded an affirmative as Cynthia commented, "She's clearly got an artist's eye for detail. Is she pretty, Wyatt?" Wyatt thought for a moment before replying, "Yes, I think most men would consider her pretty, but what has that got to do with getting her work published?" Cynthia shook her head before remarking, "Are these 3 different books, Wyatt?" "The writing material is different on each page." Wyatt looked over at his other friend. "Elizabeth said she collects anything she can write on to create her notebooks. The pages were made up of all sorts of different things. I saw her taking notes about one of the plants in a garden this morning." Clara spoke up. "Well, getting a book made is somewhere between difficult and impossible. House Emerald controls the publishing of books, and you must be an important noble to get something published." Wyatt's face showed his annoyance as he grumbled, "Of all the petty blue blood." But this time Clara held a finger to her lips and said, "Shush." Pausing for a moment to ensure Wyatt had stopped, "I said getting a book published was almost impossible, but getting a technical guide produced is very easy. You did say this was a guide to inform your new townsfolk of the plants and animals of Hago, so that they would know of the dangers and benefits of each, didn't you?" Wyatt started to understand. "Yes, I think that's more or less what I was trying to say, Clara," he replied. Clara and Cynthia both smiled, with Clara continuing, "I would not be surprised to discover that there are 1 or more people within that group of future residents of Newtown who have the required skills. Try asking if any of them have the skills to produce illustrated guides or instructions. Then ask them what equipment they need," she added with a wink. "That should be fairly cheap." Then she sat back thinking before saying, "As for your other problems, House Ferentis will be sending ships with supplies and personnel from all over their territory to help restart Hago's economy, or more likely, to get some of the equipment and factories repaired and restarted after 30 years of neglect. You may find they have space on those freighters for transporting what you need. The logical choice is, therefore, to find out what their planet's produce and which companies produce what you might need and purchase straight from the manufacturers, making sure they offer you a very good price, especially with those kinds of quantities." Clara sat back with a smile, picking up her own datapad as Cynthia returned Wyatt's to him. As Wyatt picked up his pad, he noticed a new folder had appeared, marked Ferentis Trading Companies. He started to offer his thanks only to see Clara holding her finger to her lips and so said nothing. Clara continued, "The Prince and House Ferentis have both declared that since the situation on Hago is so critical that no sales taxes will have to be paid on any and all goods delivered to Hago for at least the next year, depending on the recovery time that might be extended, the Prince has also declared that for the next year, possibly longer, no taxes will have to be paid on any goods produced by Hago, which might prove useful to anyone who would be exporting any of their resources like high-quality timber, for example." Wyatt suddenly realized this would mean his own finances would go further and that, for a little while, he would have a small advantage selling goods off-planet. Feeling guilty for asking, but knowing he had to, Wyatt said, "There is something else. Well, 2 things, actually." Clara gave a genuine laugh. "Go on, Wyatt, ask away. I will only say no if I have to." Feeling emboldened, Wyatt continued, "Firstly, when I go back to Hago, I'm going to see General Swallowtail, firstly because I want him to be assured his daughter is safe and to thank him for loaning me a ground vehicle, but also because he won't have any credits. I'd like to see what I can buy on Hago, where I can, for instance, his daughter arrived on a quad bike that is apparently made on the planet. And secondly, I was wondering, among the prisoners of the Drazen, we have 80 militia. Between 100 and 120 auxilla, I was thinking that maybe the militia could be trained to the auxilla standards, given that we do have a good sergeant major, and then maybe those auxilla could be assigned to Hago as, peacekeepers." Clara laughed again. You are getting better at this, Wyatt. I told you that this would involve diplomacy, and here you are being diplomatic about going to the general and asking me to pay for your security force. Very well, I have no problems with your dealing with the general. As you say, Hygo will produce things that you will need. Why go off-world to get them? Just make sure you get what you pay for. Wyatt nodded. Thank you, Clara and the Auxilla? He asked. Clara tapped her cheek as she thought before saying, I believe your estate is a mixture of mainly forest with some lakes, a mountain, rivers, and coastline, correct? Wyatt couldn't see where this was going. You know it is, Clara. You had the Noir Navio use its sensors to map it for me. Clara, still smiling, replied, Are you suggesting that I, a princess of House Astor, would divert this ship to perform a personal favor for my knight banneret baron? Wyatt sat there, mouth open in astonishment, thinking to himself, You suggested it, Clara. What are you playing at? Clara carried on. What I did, my dear Wyatt, was a simple performance test to determine whether the sensor capabilities of this fine vessel were still functioning after our battle by scanning the surface of Hygo, since we were already in orbit. Now, as for paying for 200 peacekeeping auxilia, I'm afraid that I could not possibly justify such an expense. Wyatt let out a groan. Well, I had to ask. Then Clara carried on. However, your estate has several interesting terrain features in a fairly compact area. I wonder if the Baron of the Screaming Forests might allow our forces to do some training exercises there, on, say, an irregular basis. This would, of course, require the construction of additional facilities, say a couple of shuttle landing pads, a firing range or two, and a small barracks to be used by those training. We would, of course, need to station a small force there, permanently, to ensure everything remained secure and for maintenance, say about 200 auxilia, all construction to be to the highest specifications, of course. She finished with a wink at Wyatt. Cynthia let out a small groan. Really? Was all she said, though, and then nodded at Wyatt. The pilot finally caught on, saying, The Baron of the Screaming Forests on Hygo would be pleased to offer his estates for limited training purposes to Her Highness. However, I am afraid we have no suitable construction equipment to enable us to build such facilities as Her Highness requested. This time Cynthia burst out laughing, saying, He got you, Clara! You asked for those facilities, now you need to pay for the equipment to build them. Clara's smile vanished, but she carried on in her cold voice. House Astor will cover the cost for the minimum amount of additional equipment required to produce such structures, in addition to the construction costs themselves. Is that agreeable, Baron? Wyatt was somewhat worried that he had upset Clara, so he replied formally, House Staples will agree to these terms. Clara stood up and went over to Wyatt. Now I believe you have to collect people from the Eternal Garden and go and see a general, was all she said, but in her hand was a box that she offered to Wyatt with a smile. You missed lunch, she said quietly, passing the box to Wyatt. Wyatt got up, taking the box with him. Thank you, my princess, was all he could manage as he went towards the door, having been dismissed. Just before he got to the door, Clara called out to him, now back in her friendly voice. Oh, and Wyatt, when you talk to those people, please let them know that I am grateful to those who help you, and terribly disappointed with those that say they are unable to do so. My brother, the prince, feels much the same as I do, but is unable due to politics to say more. Don't forget to let them know of your new status, and that you have hard credits with which to pay. As Wyatt walked out the door and down the corridor, clutching the box Clara had just given him, Cynthia turned to her friend and said, Did you really just do that? Clara turned, smiling. I thought it went quite well, all things considered, after all. You helped. Cynthia shook her head. Well, don't blame me if he comes back with a request for 100 million credits to do the work. This time it was Clara who shook her head, a tear forming in each eye. He won't, I almost wish he would, but our dear sweet friend is too honest for his own good. He will, I am sure, account for every credit and ensure he gets the best deal because that is who he is. We are trying to teach him to be noble, while he shows us, without realizing it, that many commoners have higher principles than those we hold dear. Wyatt loaded lifting chains into the shuttle before going to the Eternal Garden. This time he made himself get off the ship and go and speak to the people, those he hoped would choose to be the population of Newtown, There were over 1,000 men, women, and children assembled in the least horrible part of the vessel, an area of green fields where ordinary cattle had grazed. Wyatt was escorted into the area by a Marine. Standing on a crate that had been used to carry in supplies, Wyatt called out, "Can you all gather round, please?" It took a few minutes for everyone to form up, gathering in a circle around him, and Wyatt patiently waited for them all to quieten down. Before he started to address them, he tried to calm his nerves and began. "My name is Wyatt Staples. I'm a fighter pilot, and until very recently I was just a commoner like everyone here. Now I'm a baron, and I've just been made responsible for everyone here." On hearing this, many people went down on one knee, causing Wyatt to cringe before he resumed his speech. "No, please don't do that. I'm just Wyatt. I don't want you to treat me as anything more than just a man, because right now you are going to hate me. Believe when I tell you that I don't want to leave you in this awful place for a second longer than I have to. But for most of you, that's going to be about 3 more weeks, perhaps longer." On hearing this, many started to cry out in protest. Some were angry and shouting questions, but Wyatt pressed on, hating every moment. "Listen to me, please!" he shouted, and gradually people calmed down. Wyatt carried on. "Right now, there is a town below us on Hygo that has barely any facilities, where there's not enough food to feed all of you, and where almost nothing works. I will take people down to Hygo as soon as I can, and that typically means that those of you who will be most useful will be taken down earlier than others. But if I took you all down now, half of you would be dead within 2 weeks, and likely many of the rest within a month." Now the people were listening. Wyatt was telling them that even though they hated it here, it was worse on Hygo. So Wyatt carried on. "Even when I get you to the surface, things will be hard at least for a year, maybe 2. There will be very few credits to go around, but I promise you this. You will all have food. You will all have a roof over your heads. You will have clean water and clothes and anything else I can supply, and I will pay for that, for all of it." All of a sudden, the voices that had gradually been growing in volume stopped. Wyatt could have heard a pin drop, it went so quiet. In the silence, Wyatt carried on. "Over the next year, maybe longer, you are going to turn Newtown into a wonderful place to live. Not because I want it, but because you will get every opportunity that I can provide you to make it so. So far, I know there will be opportunities for fishermen, boat builders, farmers, and woodsmen. We have not even looked at 1/4 of the town. There will be many more careers. And when you are asked what your job used to be, I want you to also tell us if you have any hobbies or interests you would like to pursue." Wyatt reached into his pocket and took out the wooden flower he had carved only yesterday, holding it up for all to see. "For instance, I'm a pilot, but I can also carve wood. Maybe you have a hobby that could change your career. Let us know, and maybe we can help. If not now, then in the future. I can tell you this. Her Highness Princess Clara Astor has suggested that I run my barony as a cooperative. I had never heard of such a thing before, so I am sure few of you will have either. What it means is that everyone gets a share of the profits, and the harder you work, the better off you will be." This started the talking off again, and Wyatt let it continue for a while. Then he noticed a man who looked to be in his 30s raise his hand. Wyatt pointed at him and asked, "You, sir, do you have a question?" The man came forward and meekly said, "If it please you, my lord, you said there will be little credits, but there will be some. But how will we access these, and where will the credits come from?" Wyatt called out, "Firstly, please address me as Wyatt. Or if you must, sir, I hate being called my lord. It makes me feel like a useless blue blood." Some nervous laughter went through the crowd at this. When Wyatt did not stop them or object, the laughter went on. Wyatt allowed the laughter to naturally die out before carrying on. "Secondly, Her Highness has decreed that any auxilla present can remain as such, and that any militia present who passes a fitness test can join the auxilla with the permanent assignment of Hygo. The barony offers a number of advantages when it comes to its terrain, and Her Highness has accepted my offer of allowing it to be used as a small training establishment. As such, I will need a small permanent force to provide training, security, and to enforce proper behavior between military and civilian personnel. Any auxilla who accept this role will be paid as per normal, rather than being part of the cooperative, but will receive all other benefits, such as homes, food, power, and so forth. If any member of the militia or auxilla have received survival training and feel that they might be able to pass that on, please let us know when you are asked about your previous job. I am also sure that those visiting the training camp may wish to spend credits within the town, which will bring in additional income. This got another conversation started, but Wyatt interrupted this time. Now I have one problem that maybe you can help me with. There are a number of you that have agreed to look after about 50 children, for which I am very grateful, and before I leave, I'd like to speak with those people. But first, I know we have no teachers here unless some of you are secretly nobles. However, we do have teaching assistants and others who have worked in the school system who can help. What I want is to find some volunteers who would be willing to, I cannot say teach, let me say coach, these children at least until I can find trained teachers. I'm not asking for you to come forward right now, but to at least think if you have skills you can pass on. Wyatt paused for a moment, and then thought of something else. In fact, if any of you have skills you feel you could pass on to others, I'd like to know. I am not adverse to people learning new skills either for a hobby or to do something better with your life. Consider this a start over. Oh, and if we have anyone here who can swim and thinks they could show others how to swim, Newtown has a nice sandy beach, and it will have a large swimming pool. Wyatt let all of that sink in before saying, Now, if I could just have those who have agreed to look after the children come forward and bring the children with them, please. And will the half a dozen or so people I requested earlier please wait for me by the doors? As the crowd backed off and the people with the children started to approach, a young woman came up to Wyatt and asked, Excuse me, sir, but you said some of us would be earning credits, but how can we spend them or know what we have earned? None of us have any means to access them. Wyatt slapped his hand to his head and called out, Oh, I've just been reminded as soon as they arrive, every one of you will be getting your own data pad. The surprise that Wyatt was giving them each such an expensive item caused the conversations to become more animated as the majority of the crowd moved away, leaving a group of mainly young men, women, and of course children gathered around Wyatt. Wyatt jumped down and then sat on the crate he had been using as an improvised podium, looking at the children's faces looking up at him before he quietly said, I wanted to thank all of you for taking on these children. No one should have to see what they have seen, but especially not children. You all know this because you have been in this horrible place. When you go to Newtown, I will make sure you have the best homes we can give you. But I'm going to need you to show your children that there is nothing to be afraid of there. The trees cannot harm them, and they are quite safe. I will try to get trained people to help, but I expect that to be difficult. So I'd like you all to decide on one person to represent you. Take your time, and let the staff here know when you are ready. So long as I am alive, I intend to take a special interest in how these children get on with their lives, and please don't tell them there are any limits to what they can do. I was born a commoner. Now I'm an officer and a noble. Wyatt left them talking to each other and went to collect the people waiting for him. As he came up to them, he said, So I should have 2 locksmiths, a diesel mechanic, 2 handymen or maintenance men, and a boat builder, right? The 3 men and 3 women each raised a hand as he called out their professions. Good, so we are going to get on the shuttle and go down to Hago. I have to make a short stop first to pick up some equipment, and then we will go to Newtown. With his passengers loaded, Wyatt climbed into the cockpit and took some deep breaths of the clean air within, seeing that the children had been the worst part. Wyatt made up his mind there and then that he would somehow get them off the Eternal Garden and down to Newtown as quickly as possible. He had no idea how he was going to do it, but he was determined to make it happen. He quickly sent a message to request full information on the adults that had taken on the role of looking after them. Then, putting the datapad down, he got on the radio, seeking clearance for departure to Hago, and gave the initial destination as the coordinates supplied to him by General Swallowtail. This promised to be interesting. Dropping to the planet and finding the vehicle that the general was easy enough, though Wyatt was pleased to see it had been placed in a grass field well away from any buildings and with plenty of space to set the shuttle down next to it, the general was clearly visible, standing with half a dozen men next to a second vehicle as Wyatt brought the shuttle down. The engines had barely shut down when the general walked across to the shuttle, clearly unarmed, and Wyatt decided to be diplomatic, as Clara had phrased things, leaving his own pistols on the pilot's seat. As he climbed down from the cockpit and went to greet the general, he too was unarmed. Wyatt walked over to the general and gave a crisp salute. "General Swallowtail, thanks for agreeing to meet me," was all he said. The general returned the salute and replied, Baron Staples. Since we are to be neighbors, it seemed to me to be the thing to do. Wyatt winced at the word Baron, and so tentatively he held out a hand, saying, I wonder if perhaps in that case, one commoner to another, we can drop the titles. My name is Wyatt. The general looked shocked at first, and then, with a grin spreading across his face, he offered his own hand, saying, And mine is Tornell. Can I have my men help with slinging the APC? He asked, after shaking hands. Wyatt replied, That would be appreciated. The chains are heavy. I went with ones for a tank. They need to be attached to lifting points or, if there are none, to axles. Wyatt opened an external panel and dropped out the chains as the general waved his men over. It only took a minute for Wyatt to explain precisely what they needed to do. Then he walked back to Tornell. Tornell said, What is the purpose of this meeting? I'm sure it's not about my daughter. Wyatt laughed. No, Elizabeth is fine, though she does have some interesting ideas about how nobles take advantage of attractive young women. She even asked if I planned to do so. She never mentioned who her father was. I didn't know until you mentioned it last night. Tornell went a distinct shade of red at that. I told her not to believe everything she was taught. Wyatt nodded. She mentioned that, mind you, she still has no idea I know you are her father. I was busy last night and forgot to mention it this morning, but no, she is not why I came. I came because, one commoner to another, I think maybe we can help each other out. Tornell blinked. Okay, I'm listening. What do you propose? Wyatt rubbed his chin with his right hand. Well, Tornell, as I see it, House Ferentis will do as little as possible to help you out. They have agreed supplies and assistance and any number of things, but we both know that what a noble offers and what you actually get might not be the same thing. Royal treaty or not, nobles hate spending their riches on anything that doesn't directly benefit them. Also, I am only guessing here, but I suspect you are probably short of credits to buy anything new, right? Tornell nodded. Yes, most of what we produced we had to trade with the damn pirates in order to get supplies we really needed, so what are you offering? Wyatt smiled. Well, I don't suppose you can supply 1,500 domestic fridges, freezers, and cookers, nor professional cooktops, ovens, freezers, and fridges for restaurants, but I see from the quad bike your daughter arrived on, and this APC, that you clearly have some manufacturing capacity. Maybe we can buy engines suitable for boats from you, perhaps other machinery and equipment. I'll give you exactly the same amount in credits for any items you supply as I'd pay for an off-world supplier. You get the credits, and I get the items without having to wait an unknown amount of time for a freighter to arrive. Tornell looked into Wyatt's eyes, and all he could see was a genuine offer of trade and perhaps friendship. I think we can work on that, Wyatt, and whilst I can't supply you with white goods, I might be able to help with the restaurant items, for years in anticipation of House Ferentis turning up in force, or the pirates turning on us. We have created barracks and bunkers and various military structures. Those barracks have cooking facilities which we make on Hago. I think they should be very similar to any restaurant item. Good solid construction with a stainless steel shell so they can be easily cleaned. Is that what you were after? Wyatt looked at Tornell in surprise. That sounds exactly like what we need. So far from what we have seen in Newtown, everything was well made, but most mechanical things are worn out. I will get a list to you in a few days. Oh, and we also need lots of things to do minor repairs. Wyatt consulted his data pad. Nails and screws and sandpaper, paint and paintbrushes, not to mention we're going to need soap and disinfectant, and, well, you get the idea. The conversation went on for almost 30 minutes, not quite friendly, but certainly not as adversaries, until they noticed that Tornell's men had finished attaching the chains to the 8-wheeled armored personnel carrier. Wyatt checked that everything was correctly tightened, then gave instructions on how to connect the cables he would drop from the shuttle to the chains. Finally, he returned to Tornell. I forgot to ask, he said. You mentioned fuel for the vehicle? Yes, it's fully fueled, and there are 2 extra 220-liter drums of diesel inside, firmly strapped down. In total, that should give you well over 500 kilometers range or about 5 hours driving at full speed, said Tornell before continuing. I have also put in a couple of crates of my daughter's things, the stuff she would always pack when we went traveling, and her mother added extra clothes and bedding and, well, you get the idea. I'm not going to be able to hide the fact that I know you're her father, said Wyatt. Ah, that should be interesting. Tornell offered his hand again, and Wyatt shook it, both saying, until we meet again at the same time, and then they both smiled. Then Wyatt returned to the shuttle. As he took off, he deployed the lifting cables, carefully positioning the shuttle above the APC. He held his position, watching the monitors as Tornell's men connected the hooks. Wyatt carefully lifted using the onboard winches to adjust the position beneath the shuttle so that it was well balanced before heading off towards Newtown. 45 minutes later, he set the APC on the ground and released the hooks. Then he retracted the cables and put the shuttle down a short distance away. By the time he had shut everything down and opened the shuttle doors to let his passengers out, a small crowd had gathered to look at the new vehicle. Amongst them were Declan and his men, who Wyatt waved over, saying, "In the back of that thing there should be a pair of crates. Can you bring them to the square, please?" As he pointed to the APC, Declan nodded, saying, "At once, my lord." As soon as Wyatt had inspected the shuttle, he went over to Declan, who was busy helping extract the two relatively large crates past the fuel drums and out of the rear doors. Once they were outside, the men picked up the crates by their grab handles. With 2 men per crate, they carried them towards the square. Wyatt spoke to Declan as they walked. "Did you finish inspecting the shops around the square?" Declan replied, "Yes, my lord, as you commanded." Wyatt sighed. "Then give me a report, please." "My lord, there are 5 structures on each side of the square which form shops. The 4 corner structures are split into 2 separate shops, each about 6 meters in width and perhaps 12 meters front to back. Above these shops, accessed via a staircase at the rear of the shop, are 3-story homes of the same width, but only about 9 meters deep. The other 3 stores on each side are a full 12 meters wide and deep. 4 of them have 2 additional 9 by 12 meter floors above them, again accessed by a staircase towards the rear of the shop. The central shop area is spread over 2 floors, with a central staircase going up to a second 12 by 12 meter store area, with again a staircase to the rear leading up to 2 further floors 9 by 12 meters in area. Every store also had a staircase leading down to a cellar. All the cellars appeared to be dry, and all were cool, my lord. Trapdoors towards the rear of the store allow raising and lowering of items in and out of the cellars from inside the store. A second set of doors between the front of the arcade wall and the front of the store allow for items to be delivered to the cellar from outside. The gap between the front arcade wall and the shop front is approximately 3 meters wide, and there are large metal lifting eyes set into the roof of the arcade above each set of doors. To the rear of each store there is a roughly 30-meter deep walled area, clearly intended to be a garden, though these are in various conditions. Wyatt listened to the report before saying, "I see. Tell me, Declan, of the 4 corner pairs of shops and homes, which pair would you say is in the best condition?" Declan paused briefly, tapping his chin with his index finger while he thought, then continued with his walking. "I would say, my lord, that the 2 corner properties at the clock tower end of the shop arcades are both in excellent condition, but if you force me to choose, I would say those next to the town hall are just slightly superior. They were cleaner, and the gardens to the rear looked to have had more work done on them." As they approached the square, Wyatt asked, "Do you happen to know if Ino found suitable accommodation for our new arrivals?" "Yes, my lord. Ino found a barracks building apparently capable of taking up to 200 people. He has allocated men to the upper floor and ladies to the lower one. We have just enough tables and chairs inside the inn to provide food for all who are here now, including those you just bought down, but any more will require extra facilities, though the barracks has its own mess area. But quite frankly, I understand that it is in deplorable condition." Upon arrival at the square, Wyatt directed that the 2 crates be taken upstairs to the nearest apartment above the shop in the corner next to the town hall, and left just inside the door. Then he went to find Doc Smith and Elizabeth. The doc was easy to find. He was helping out in the kitchen, so Wyatt asked him to come outside. "So, Matthew, I think as the person who made sure we had safe drinking water, I ought to make sure you have an office and a place to live," said Wyatt, pointing to the shop next but one to the town hall. "Will that do?" he asked. Matthew Smith looked at Wyatt, who just smiled and pointed at the door. "Have a look around and tell me if it will work." Matthew had just gone through the shop's front door when Elizabeth came trudging through the archway under the clock tower. She was obviously tired, hot, and likely hungry as well. Not about to waste a perfect opportunity for a joke, Wyatt called her over. "Elizabeth, I was thinking that there will be a lot of people to instruct about the native plants and animals. That maybe you should have somewhere to write up your notes and perhaps display them. Maybe an office of some sort. I also thought that putting that office next to the dock might be a good idea if he needs advice about stings or poisonous plants or whatever. I just suggested to him that he take the shop over there," said Wyatt, pointing to the door that Doc Smith had walked through not 2 minutes earlier. "And I was wondering if you would like the one next door?" Elizabeth was clearly somewhat tired and slightly confused, but she allowed Wyatt to guide her to the front door and inside where she looked around. "I'm not sure," she said. "I'd need to talk to my father and ask his permission first. I only expected to be away from home for a week, 10 days at most, but there is a lot more to see and do here than I had realized." Wyatt nodded. "That's fair," he began. "You should get your parents' approval before a big decision. Oh, by the way, there's an apartment upstairs and a garden at the rear. Why don't you have a look around whilst you make up your mind?" As Elizabeth headed up the staircase at the rear of the shop, Wyatt started counting. He hadn't even reached 10, when from upstairs there came the cry of, "You bastard! You knew!" causing Wyatt to start laughing as he crossed the square to the door of the inn. End of day 2.